Hey y'all, this is David Ducker coming back at you. I thought I'd do a video about superhero RPGs, or science hero RPGs, as you must call them if you don't want to pay Marvel and DC a nickel every time you say it, because they actually own the rights to that word, superhero. So no one else can use that word except Marvel and DC, and they can sue you otherwise. But that's a little off topic. Superhero RPGs represent their own set of challenges, but they also have a unique reward you can get out of them. It's a double-edged sword. Their very strength is their weakness, and vice versa. In superhero RPGs, and I mean this is true of their literature as well, or film, the characters are all more powerful than any other genre. This is the strength and the weakness of that genre of superheroes. The strength is it allows you to tell these epic stories, larger than life, and it allows you to get down to player versus player, person versus person, really quick, really easy. So there's a great clarity you can get out of a superhero game. There's a great focus that you can get out of a superhero game. It just bring all the drama, all the character-based drama to the forefront. It's wonderful. Now the problem with that is when you're that powerful, as I said, there's no obstacle to get in the way of player versus player. Usually there are man versus nature stories you throw in to pad out the player versus player stuff. You know, for example, there's the long journey, there's traps, there's monsters, there's mooks who actually put up a threat, be they a tribe of trolls or an enormous ogre. So there's all these distractions, all this padding, all this filler that turns the story into a journey rather than just skipping all that, which is what superhero games do. Because you're so powerful, you just can do that, which you can't do in any other genre. And that's great because it lets you get down to the meat of the story. The problem is, because you're going through the meat of the story so quick, there needs to be a lot of meat to go through. You know, in a fantasy game, space opera game, pretty much anything but superheroes, you only need let's say at its most basic, you only need one big bad guy, one antagonist, one dynamic opposition antagonistic relationship, and you can pad that out by going through the mooks, by tracking down the baddie, by him throwing mini bosses at you. You can pad that out for a whole campaign if you needed to, if you wanted to, you know, Lord of the Rings style. If Frodo could fly, or if Frodo had super speed, it wouldn't be 6 books, it wouldn't be 3 volumes, it wouldn't be 3 movies, it would be 1 episode, 1 issue in a comic book series. And what that means is, when you're running a superhero game, either you shorten your expectation and you say, okay, I am only going to prepare 1 villain, but I'm not going to expect it to run for a full year or 6 months or 3 months. I'm going to expect it to run for, 1 to 4 sessions, something like that. And that's fine. I love mini campaigns. But if you're going to run a superhero game for the long haul, for 6 months, for a year, for 2 years, you got to remember they're going to be grinding through these relationships really quick. So you need to create a lot of them, and you need to create them off the bat. and create this great political web for them. So instead of having hero and villain, which is great, but it'll only last you 4 sessions maximum, you need to have all these shades of gray, all these supporting cast members, hundreds of supers in your world, each with their own agendas, each with varying degrees of legitimacy. If you want to do, let's say, a Marvel DC mashup campaign setting, then why don't you do the Avengers and make them part of the military industrial complex? Tony Stark, Captain America, Bruce Banner, they have all these military ties. Throw them in. They're sponsored by the U.S. government. That's one faction. And each member of the faction has their own agendas as well. Throw in the Justice League, same setting, but make the Justice League, let's make them just kind of neutral. They're not allied to any government, not even the UN. They're their own entity. So they're trying to do what's best for everyone, whereas the Avengers are trying to do what's best for the good old USA. Those things don't always line up. And there might be mistrust between these two groups, bringing them into conflict. Now you're getting some drama, you have conflict. Who are the PCs going to side with their super team? And pad it out some more, Teen Titans, bring them in as the Justice League's feeder organization. Bring in the X-Men, so they're seen more as a vigilante organization, perhaps. So nobody really trusts them. They think perhaps that they're villains even. Bring in the Brotherhood of Mutants. They're an open terrorist organization. So they're going to have problems with a lot of other people. Bring in the Masters. Not the Masters of Evil, because that colors them as evil, but the Masters, and you could bring them in as I'm trying to think what the roster on the Masters of Evil is. I think they'd probably go pretty similarly to the Brotherhood of Mutants, where they'd be pretty terroristic. Probably worse than the Brotherhood. The Brotherhood, you can get some sympathy. You can get sympathy out of Magneto. You can't get so much sympathy out of like Red Skull and Kang the Conqueror and the other Mamelukes in the Masters. Why don't you bring in Legion of Doom as Lex Luthor's Luthor Corp, LexCorp corporate super team? They present themselves as heroes, and maybe in your world they are after a fashion, but they're corporately owned. So they're going to do what's best for Luthor Corp. And then you can throw in Hive, which is a Teen Titans kind of antagonistic super team, and bring them in under Brother Blood as a religiously sponsored super team, right? So they're not good, not evil, but they're only working towards the goals of their religion. They're in this case. I think they're a cult of personality built around Brother Blood, but you could soften that. What about a Vatican super team? The Catholic Church could form a super team. And once you fill the world up with all these different factions, you've got all these points of interest, points of conflict, when you can get the military team, the corporate team, the UN-sponsored team, you can get in a religiously motivated team, a terroristic team, and now you can release the players into this political web and let them decide who do they ally with, who are they enemies against, let them fight each other, let people jump teams, turn from one philosophy to another, let them be double agents. You can get a lot of great storylines out of a superhero game. Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver, they can jump from the Brotherhood over to the Avengers. And how does Magneto feel about this? How does Captain America feel about this? Or have Doctor Strange show up, and he's forming a super team, so he wants to bring the Hulk out of the Avengers, and he's going to bring in, Submariner and Silver Surfer and himself and the Hulk, and they're going to make a new super team, the Defenders. How does everyone feel about Hulk leaving? So great points to clash on, great points to get that long-running game. But you've got to set this all up in advance. You've got to have all your teams lined up right from the get-go, and got to have their rosters lined up right from the get-go. And in the case of a superhero game, you got to have each individual's powers lined up from the get-go too. So again, working with that full sandbox style with a political web, doing it in a superhero game is really hard. It's just so much work. Like, no individual piece is hard, but the actual amount of work to put in is huge. Like, when I'm prepping a regular game, I'll have 50 NPCs made up. I'll have 10 or 15 factions made up before we start. But in a superhero game, that's only going to last you like a quarter of the length that it usually would. Like, in that game that I'm talking about, like, I'd expect 50 NPCs and 10 factions to last me like a year. A superhero game, that'll last you 3 months. They'll burn through it. So if you want to run a year in a superhero game, you got to prep like 300 NPCs. You've got to have like 50 factions. Like, it's just enormous. And you can certainly do that. You can run it long, but don't be afraid to run it short. Short games are awesome too. So those are my basic thoughts on a superhero game. It's just so character driven that you need to really make all the characters right off the bat, and they need to be deep characters, and they need to be all allied in these different factions, because each character is so much more important in a superhero game because they're so much more powerful. So really put in the prep, and you can tell a story you can't tell in any other genre. You can have great rewards out of a superhero game. It's just it requires that work up front, that's all. And you shouldn't be afraid of that. So don't decry superhero games and say that they're terrible and schlocky and cliche, because that's only if you don't do the work. If you run it on a railroad, if you have a villain of the week, it doesn't make sense. So don't do that. Do it like you would do any other campaign. Just be aware that you don't have any filler to work with. So those are my thoughts again on superhero games. Superhero gaming, excellent genre, requires more work, it's character driven, there's no filler. It's all killer, no filler. I'm going to sign off now. You guys have yourself a good day out in YouTube land.